Last night, Ukraine was under attack, a massive assault by drones, including Shahed-type drones and other models that Russia has now routinely used to carry out terror against our cities. Over the past day, if we look at the night before last, we saw the enemy attack Kyiv, where unfortunately there are casualties and injured rescuers, civilian rescuers who had arrived to deal with the aftermath of the enemy's horrific actions. Last night, the city of Kharkiv was especially under heavy attack, as was western Ukraine Ternopil, once again, which also suffered during the night from the 5th to the 6th of June. So we can see that the enemy is not stopping these attacks. But of course, our air defense forces and the defense forces of Ukraine are doing everything possible to minimize any consequences from such terrorist actions by the enemy. In particular, our forces are responding to the enemy's actions and striking targets on Russian territory. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has confirmed explosions at the Engels and Dyagilevo airfields. Dozens of explosions have been recorded in the target areas. The results of the strikes are being clarified. It has also been confirmed that at least 3 fuel and lubricants storage tanks were hit in the Saratov region. In addition, the defense forces attacked a number of important enemy targets on the territory of Russia and in the occupied areas. In particular, it is reported that the 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment was hit. The results regarding the consequences of the attack are being clarified. So we can see that strikes are indeed being carried out and will continue to be carried out. By the way, Keith Kellogg, Trump's special representative on Ukraine, did mention that he has military experience and that he is a general, and he spoke objectively from a military perspective. In other words, Kellogg was brought to speak frankly. Obviously, in this case, professionalism and a certain level of experience outweighed the political calculations of, for example, Trump or his entourage. What did Kellogg say? He said that the SBU Special Operation Web to destroy Russia's strategic aviation is an example of effective and courageous leadership. This event could become a catalyst for peace. But both sides must remain committed to President Trump's mission to stop the bloodshed and put an end to the war. Kellogg emphasized that bold leadership and daring actions can change the nature of the battlefield, referring both to his own military experience and to historical examples. Bold leadership and daring actions that change the nature of the battlefield. I think it is very important to remember these words, because it is precisely in the spirit of these words and expressions that our defense forces of Ukraine are now acting, striking at Russian territory, at the enemy, at its military facilities, at military industrial complex sites, as well as at targets in the occupied territories. Moreover, interesting piece of news, and an article appeared in the American publication The Washington Post. And it says the following, that Poltina the Web is just the beginning. The complex resistance to Russia will continue. Other operations are already being prepared. I understand that, judging by the headline, many of you will ask the question, why announce that something is being prepared? But it's important to understand that this material is based on reports from sources, including intelligence agencies and special services, particularly from Ukraine. Why might this be done? Considering that, as we saw with Operation Web, there were no leaks. So I don't think these are intentional information leaks, or rather they are intentional, but their purpose is, among other things, information and psychological warfare. In the 21st century, to ignore the informational dimension, to disregard the role of the media, to overlook the role of social networks, this is a mistake, a huge mistake. The war is being waged here as well. Against us, the enemy employs entire institutions that work for the Russian Ministry of Defense, the Russian FSB, the Russian GRU, which develop methods of information counteraction, conduct psychological warfare, and carry out information psychological operation. Therefore, we cannot neglect this and must also develop these areas of ours and correctly, competently, skillfully, and effectively use the opportunities, including conducting information psychological operations, as well as demonstrating to the enemy our readiness for further successful actions. That is why I believe this is intentional. Strategy. So, Ukrainian special services are preparing new operations against Russia. Intelligence is considering the possibility of attacking Russian ships with naval drones. Meanwhile, the front line inside Ukraine, where the Russian army is trying to push, remains a hellish landscape of drones. Ukrainian special services are preparing coordinated actions against enemy military forces deep inside Russia. Following Operation Web, other complex strikes are possible, according to the Washington Post, citing its intelligence sources. Ukrainian intelligence services are capable of striking Russian military targets deep inside Russia and even around the world. I want to emphasize that as well. This is a very interesting remark directed at our special services and the aside around the world. This means that certain incidents information is already known. And this means that our special services have already entered the golden pages of intelligence history, on par with MI6, Mossad, and the CIA. There is something to be proud of, and this is our advantage. Of course, we must use it absolutely correctly. The authors of the Washington Post, the authors of this article, talk about the front in comparison to what is happening on the battlefield, about how Ukraine is using its asymmetric methods to strike deep into Russian territory. So there are two such dimensions. If we cannot counterattack the enemy with large forces directly on the front right now, even though perhaps we would like to, it's simply a matter of capability. Then we will strike at his territory, at his factories, at his enterprises, at concentrations of manpower, equipment, forces, and resources. That is the right thing to do. In its article, the Washington Post quotes the head of the Security Service of Ukraine, Vasyl Malyuk, saying that Ukraine's drone attack on a Russian airbase last weekend was a serious blow to the power of the Russian Federation. Secret operations may continue while the front line remains a hellish landscape of drones and artillery. According to the Washington Post, citing intelligence sources, other complex operations are already being prepared. Indeed, active fighting continues on the front. The enemy is attacking the Sumy region, intensifying its offensive actions here, and is already using its drones to attack Sumy. As of today, there is no direct threat to the regional center, but the enemy, Sumy itself is not that far from the border with Russia, and the enemy is trying to operate in the border settlements, to advance, to break through our positions. There are certain threats there because Russia is using this operation to attack from the flank, essentially putting pressure from the northern flank, thereby stretching our units in defense and thus tying down certain forces. And at this time, the main strike by the enemy is still being delivered in the Donetsk region, that is the Pokrovsk direction, Kostiantynivka, and the Lyman direction. These remain for the Russian forces, the central directions for their attacks. According to Deep State, the enemy has about 2 kilometers left to reach the Dnipropetrovsk region, and the pressure in the direction of Novopavlivka is increasing every day. According to the battle map, as of June 5, 2025, the enemy has entrenched themselves 2 kilometers away. Excuse me, please. 2 kilometers from Sichislavshina. The Russians are exerting pressure with the forces of the 1st Brigade and 2 regiments, reinforced with fresh recruits. So, essentially, these are the enemy's actions. That is, as I mentioned before, the enemy's priority and main focus will be the capture of Donetsk region. It is especially important for them, primarily for informational and propaganda purpose, even more so than for military objectives, to break into a settlement somewhere in the Dnipropetrovsk region and claim, look, we've achieved results. As if to say, the war is now spreading to other regions as well. This, as of today, is the aggressor's goal. Meanwhile, our forces are doing everything possible to hold them back and stop them. And we can see that no matter what, the enemy's advance is slow. That is, for quite some time now, they have been trying to push into the Dnipropetrovsk region, but we have managed to hold them back and prevent them from advancing further, let alone moving deeper into the region, deeper into Sichislavshina. That's the situation. Of course, the enemy's pressure on the front will continue to increase. That is why it is critically important for us to use all our available tools to strike both the occupied territories and Russia itself. This is what can give us a certain direct advantage. Because against the backdrop of the current situation, first of all, we need weapons and we need resources, particularly to hold back the enemy, since the New York Times wrote a somewhat pessimistic article, and they noted that Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, allegedly failed to convince the President of the United States to provide more active assistance to Ukraine during his visit to the United States and meeting with Donald Trump. German Chancellor Merz visited Washington on Thursday, hoping to persuade Trump to take a more active role in defending Ukraine. However, he was unable to achieve this. The New York Times reports this once again. According to the publication, neither publicly nor in his private conversation with Merz did Trump make any concrete commitments to support Ukraine with weapons or to impose new sanctions against Russia. Moreover, Trump even hinted that Ukraine, which has become a victim of aggression, could itself come under sanctions. Just imagine. In other words, Trump didn't even mention the fact that he gave Putin 2 weeks a deadline, by the way, that expires at the end of this week. Another 2 weeks during which Putin has taken no steps toward peace and has made no moves to establish a lasting ceasefire. And on top of that, he's threatening Ukraine. That's the situation. Moreover, the Trump administration is trying to force Senator Lindsey Graham to significantly weaken his sanctions bill against Russia amid the White House intentions to improve relations with Moscow. This is reported by another leading American publication, The Wall Street Journal. Trump fears that the restrictions provided for in the bill against key Russian officials and sectors, as well as secondary sanctions against countries that continue to do business with Moscow, could undermine this goal. According to journalist sources, in recent weeks, representatives of the White House and other government agencies have been informally contacting Graham's office, urging the inclusion of exceptions in the bill that would allow Trump to choose whom or what to impose sanctions against. Another way to weaken the bill is to replace the word must with may everywhere it appears in the text, thereby removing the mandatory nature of the document. The co-author of the bill, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal, confirmed the fact of private conversations with the White House, but refused to comment on their substance. Graham himself is ready to make changes to the document, introducing exceptions for countries that provide military or economic assistance to Ukraine. They will not be subject to the 500% tariffs for purchasing Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other products. So it's about easing. What is this about? The point is that, firstly, if a bill is initiated either by the Senate or the House of Representatives, it becomes a law. Accordingly, it is no longer an executive order of the President of the United States. it is no longer his decree, and it is no longer solely his decision. This is a decision made by the legislative body, which in particular establishes certain obligations for the head of the White House, that is for Donald Trump or, for example, the next president. So, what did Graham's bill propose? Graham's bill quite simply stipulates that if it is discovered that a country is known to be supplying Russian oil, gas, uranium, or other rare earth minerals and resources from Russia to China or to other countries, and in exchange these countries provide Russia with funds or dual-use technologies, weapons, or essential components for manufacturing those same drones, UAVs, and so on, then tariffs of 500% are imposed on them. These are hellish sanctions, and this applies to every owner, not just China, not just Iran, not just North Korea, but also European countries in particular. And right now there is supposedly talk about making exceptions for them. And then there's Trump, who doesn't want to be obligated, but instead wants to have the authority to choose when he can impose sanctions and when he cannot. That's why replacing these terms, these words, seemingly doesn't affect a significant part of the bill. But these details play a significant role because they reveal a lot. And we see that Graham has no choice but to make certain compromises. At least he didn't withdraw the bill. But the fact that pressure is being applied also indicates certain intentions in politics. That is, the political priorities the Trump administration is currently setting. Unfortunately, the President of the United States still holds the position that there is no need, that things should be softened, that it is possible to come to an agreement with Putin. And tell me after this that the information from Elon Musk about Epstein's parties, who was prosecuted for organizing orgies, sexual harassment, drugs, and so on, everything that typically accompanies this, that Magis hints that these videos and photos might be in the possession of Russian intelligence services, the FSB, and not only them. Perhaps it is with this very material that Putin is blackmailing Trump, or with other compromising evidence about connections with the KGB, the FSB, about Agent Krasnov, and so on. Well, there is clearly a lot of evidence, and then there's the threat to impose sanctions against Ukraine, to hurt us. So there are many such elements. But I hope that the Senate and Congress will show, that is the entire Congress, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, that they are an independent body and will still put pressure on the President of the United States. Please, excuse me. Meanwhile, the German Ministry of Defense, represented by Christian Freudinger, notes that European countries are capable of compensating for US military aid if there is political will. We will be able to do this if we have the political will. I am firmly convinced of this, commented Bundeswehr General Christian Freudinger regarding Europe's ability to replace American military aid. He emphasized that the war against Ukraine is being waged on our continent, and it is also directed against the European security order. I believe, said Freudinger, that if there is political will here, then the means will also appear to largely compensate for American support. At the same time, Hesseduche pointed out that the future position of the United States regarding military aid to Ukraine is currently undetermined. Well, indeed, that's exactly right. Unfortunately, as of today, we do not have any clarity. However, we do have clarity about, well, it's very good that Germany is raising this issue. Germany, as one of the leaders of the European Union and a leader in the defense industry, a country focused on the arms market, on production, including assistance in training our military, on joint production of weapons, ammunition, and equipment is, of course, extremely important. And it is good that Freuding has such an approach, which I hope will influence political decisions. Freuding is a respected and professional individual, has visited Ukraine, and it is good that he articulates the things we need and that are important to us in the German media segment. Because while the plans of the US are currently unknown, the plans of Putin are well known. After all, Russia is planning a large-scale expansion of the occupation in Ukraine despite Western calls for restraint. Ukrainian officials said during their visit to Washington, according to Colonel Pavlo Paliza, deputy head of the Office of the President, the Kremlin is preparing for a new phase of the war. In the fall, Russia aims to fully capture the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, create a buffer zone on the northern border, and as early as next year, occupy all territory of Ukraine east of the Dnipro and reach the Black Sea by seizing Odessa and Mykolaiv. Western intelligence sees no signs that Putin has abandoned his strategic goal of permanently subjugating Ukraine and striking a grand deal with the West that would change the European security architecture. We are aware of the enemy's plans, and it is very good that representatives of the President's office articulate this publicly at meetings in order to inform our partners.